It's time to paint my Deathwatch Kill Team. Last week, I finished building a little kit bash of 2 different types of Space Marines, and it's time to get some paint on them. Let's get started. Here are our Space Marine friends, and they're all primed up, and I reassemble them again temporarily, only because I've got 10 of these guys, and I don't want to lose track of what goes where. It's one of the challenges of batch painting. I haven't done a lot of it, but the few jobs that I've done have been kind of difficult just because it's difficult to keep track of all the pieces and it just gets overwhelming. So I'm going to base these with a bit of black glaze, and I'm going to focus on just a few models at a time so that it's all manageable. And this means assembly and reassembly kind of constantly, but that's okay. Let's get started. In this case, the only things I'm not basing in black are those things I know for sure are not going to be black. So I'm thinking things like ranged weapons. Those are going to be red, so I don't touch those. And maybe with the melee weapons, the pommels or the handles, those are not going to be black. In fact, many of my melee weapons will not be black, but I'm still going to start painting them because they're going to be metallic or something like that, or at least the thunder hammers. I don't know. Maybe the swords. I'll stick with that bright blue that I've done for power swords. So I won't cover those in black. But it's a fairly, kind of a zen process to just slather some black glaze on these parts. This is a part of every building project where you don't have to be all that careful. So it's a little liberating sometimes. Just turn off your brain and just dab, dab, dab some paint. Oh, here's a sergeant. So we'll work on this guy next. And so the first thing I want to do is remove the head so I can get into that little area. I'll set the head aside, remove the lightning claws, set those aside. Just so you can kind of see what that looks like when it's getting based. And here I'm trying to avoid the purity seal because that's not going to be anywhere near black. And fixing that after the fact is a little harder than just avoiding it before you do that. It can still be changed, but it's a lot easier for you if you don't have to correct when you use black on a piece. It's going to end up being light in color. So it's best to avoid that if at all possible. And here it's pretty simple, so no skin off my back. Let's get that done. So we're here at the point where most of everything that needs to be based in black has been based in black, and we've got what's starting to look like some pretty interesting looking dudes. Certainly much better than my first batch of kill teams, or kill team dudes. There's lots of variations on the color black, and so I think the next step is to go in and base anything that's going to be red. So specifically, really, I'm just meaning the weapons. Not these guys, although maybe I can start messing with them as well, since they're going to be blue. But overall, they're starting to take some shape nicely. And so my goal here is to base the red parts enough, but also kind of cement or finalize their poses, so that I can glue down the heads and the legs. So in order to figure out which way the Marines' heads are going to be looking, so for example here, this guy, I think I want him looking towards wherever the sword is going to be, and so that also will determine how his torso's moving around. So I'm going to make those decisions, solidify the position of the head and the legs, and that way all we have to keep track of from now on are the arms and whatever they're doing. So I'll work on that first, glue them down, and it makes managing the batch, I think, a little faster or a little easier. So I'll work on that. So as an example, I want this guy kind of looking like this. So where his gun is pointing really is going to determine which way his torso is swinging and his helmet is pointing. So it's going to be kind of a side-on look. I think it's going to be interesting to look at. So it's time to glue him down. And let him dry for a bit, and I'll work on the rest of these dudes, kind of doing the same thing. As I was gluing down my Space Marine friends here, I realized that I couldn't glue this guy down or this guy down because their heads aren't painted. And so I need to take kind of break from my usual routine here, or at least my plan routine. Just go ahead and start getting the head ready to be glued. So I'm going to take them off here, and since these aren't helmets, I have to kind of do kind of the flesh. Here I think I'm using some tanned flesh, and it's another glaze, although this is a little thicker than I'd like. I'm just going to apply it everywhere because it's going to be the lightest tone on my face, not my face marine, my Space Marine. And I might need a couple of coats of this. It's a little light, but that's okay because I'm also going to do some washing, and so it'll be fine. But I need to add enough, I don't want to say detail, but enough coverage so that I can glue it down without risking interfering with subsequent painting. So I'll come back in later and do some of the details, like all the cybernetics and stuff like that. But I just want to make sure to add the base. As those heads dry, I want to do something a little special with this guy. He looks really cool in this pose, but this pose is only possible because it's got sticky tack holding his arms together in that way. So I want kind of like a good old rawr kind of pose. And so I can't do it with just glue, so I've prepared a little bit of Milliput, this little ball here. I've let it dry for about, I don't know, 15 minutes, half an hour, something like that. When you first create the Milliput, it's a little rough. Alright, it's time to start adding a bit of detail painting. For now, mostly in places like this, and here, where I can't paint once I glue the arms on. So I'm going to do kind of the torso, and I'm going to do the arms if they need any additional painting. So for these little pouches, I'm going to go with the kind of a leather look, and so I'll hit those details. Basically in preparation to glue the arms in their final position so that I can really get it in there and do some detailing. So I'll start there. So you try to be careful to make sure that what new paint you're applying doesn't get on other parts. You don't want to ruin what you've already done, but sometimes stuff happens, and you can always go back and touch it up with a little bit of black paint. But so don't worry if you make a mistake, although certainly at this point try to be less slapdash than you perhaps have been up to this point. Yeah, so basically here we're painting anything that we'd rather not paint later once the arms are attached to the model. So on this chainsword, I'm adding all the little details like the serrated teeth. I guess like the engine, the power source. I'm not sure what this is, but it's a little detail element on the chainsword itself. I'm giving that an undercoat so I can add a metallic color to it later. So these are all just little things that I'd rather not do when the chainsword is fully attached to my Space Marine. I mean, it could still happen, but it's a lot harder once, you know, it's in a tight space. So doing it before you glue is going to save you a lot of time, a lot of effort, and potentially a few tears. Don't tell me I'm the only one who cries when I do painting. Just me? Okay. Just checking. Here's where we are once all the glue has dried. Our Marines are in their final pose. Even our special friend here with the Milliput bare arms. It doesn't look great. If you look at it too closely, you're like, ugh, yikes. But now that he's painted, or he's based, it doesn't look too bad. I mean, you can tell that the paint coverage is a little different. I may have to give it another pass with the black base just to kind of hide some of the weirdness. But overall, it's the first Milliput job I've done that worked kind of as intended. So, you know, it's kind of a victory. But I have kind of a unit of pretty cool looking Space Marines. I mean, they're not done, but this is much better than my original kill team. And in fact, I think I'm gonna pull out my original kill team and compare them to these guys, just so I can kind of get a sense for my progress as a painter. It sounds weird to say that. Oh no! No! Hopefully my progress as a painter is better than my progress as a, stacker? Clearly I failed at that job. But yeah, I like how these guys are shaping up. Even this guy, with his emo hair, doesn't look too bad. Obviously I still have a lot to go, but that's what's coming up next is all the details. All the basing is set. Now it's time to spend some quality time with each of the models and making sure they shine. These raised portion on the boots, I don't know if they're greaves or what, but they're deceptively difficult to paint. They're raised so you think, yeah, I can just dry brush that. But they're not raised a ton, so you have to be really careful. And they're curved. So just kind of a nightmare to do a good job, and for me anyway. So at this point, I'm noticing that a lot of the paint that I've applied is kind of coming off at the edges. It's all my handling of the model. So I hate to do this, but these little sticks they're really not doing the job. So I'm going to have to base them, and I don't really want to do that because it always gives me some trouble, but I think it's going to be the only way to keep my mitts off of these models. So I've got these bases primed. They're relatively simple, and I've primed them in black, which is not something I normally do, but this is going to be just kind of a basic metallic industrial setting kind of a deal. So I'm going to do a little dry brush on these. So basically I'm going to skip from the models over to the basing because I think it's time. So it might mess up with the order of the video a bit, and for that I'm sorry. Just don't think I have a good option at this point. The dry brush, I'm going to put away my wet palette because it's basically the opposite of what I need for a dry brush. I've been playing with this thing. It's just like a little plastic palette, but it's not a wet palette. It's just like a basic palette. And so the idea is that whatever paint I load onto my brush will not get damp. And the reason that's important to me in this case is because I'm dry brushing. In the past I've done dry brushing where I loaded the brush from the wet palette and it was just, no matter how much I dried the brush, it was too wet. And it left behind quite a lot of paint. And I think it's happening here too. Or maybe I'm just applying too much pressure. I don't know. Well, that's fine, I guess. I'll go over it with some black wash. It's not what I wanted, but I'll make it work. Alright, here are our Space Marine friends as they stand so far. I added these bases, and each of them have this little detail on them, so they're basically industrial. But they've got some other stuff happening too. So there's like this metal mesh that they're all standing on, but some of them have these pipes that have pipes within them. Some of them have these little corrosive effects, so I've painted them all up. And any metal details on the base, I just made sure that they were nice and rusted. I've been having some trouble characterizing rust on my painted models, usually bases. And this time I think they worked out pretty well. I don't know what the difference is. So, just to kind of recap, I glued these on to their bases because I was handling them too much, and as you can tell, some of these models have gone from black to basically gray. And so I think it might be a good idea to kind of go over them with a very light black wash, just to kind of refresh the black. Yeah, I mean, some of these models have been impacted worse than others. Like this one's, you know, basically white, and it's got a little smudge there. So for this step, I'm going to pick some of these dudes that could benefit from an additional pass of black. I don't know that all of them need it. Oh, maybe they do. But I'll focus on one so you can see the impact of what I'm talking about. So let's go for this guy. It's a good look at him. He's pretty decent. I'm hoping that my glaze is light enough. In fact, I'm going to err on the side of caution, add a bit more water. I want just the lightest of glazes, maybe like a medium-sized wash or a medium thickness wash. And so I'm just going to hit them kind of everywhere. So what I want is to refresh the black paint without touching any of the other basting colors. The other probably more important thing is I don't want to go very dark because I don't want that glazing look to go away. I don't want it to be black, I want it to be glazed black. Because if I keep that look, I don't have to do much, if any, edge highlighting. Which is, you know, I'm okay with like vehicles and larger models like Terminators. But little dudes like Space Marines, I find it pretty difficult. So I don't want to blacken these up too much. I just want to touch up the existing black. Just make it a little bit more black. So that's what he looks like now. He looks quite a bit more, quite a bit darker. Of course, he hasn't dried yet, so we don't really know what he's going to end up looking like. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do this next one. I'm going to do this in parts. So this guy, just so we can tell what we've done, I'm going to do, say, I'm going to reapply the black on the right half of the model and leave the left half of the model kind of as is. Obviously, I'm not going to leave it that way. I just want to see what difference this does, because I'm taking a little bit of time, using a little bit of extra paint to reapply some of this black glaze. And I think it's going to have the effect I want, but I don't know this for a fact. So let's do a little testing. Okay, So you can kind of see that one part of this model is a little darker than the other. But that just might be because one side is wet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry and see what my results are. I hope this works. I hope I didn't just waste my time, and more importantly, yours. So let's take a look at our guy who is half painted. And so here we see that this side right here, I guess the right side on your screen, I think, I'm not sure, well, this side right here, it's substantially more black than this side. And that's what I was going for. So this tells me that this is a worthwhile pursuit. I will go ahead and apply this black wash or this really thin black glaze on the rest of my models. This is what the guy looks like once the full body kind of glaze has dried. So that looks nice and dark. It's clearly black, but it also is still a glaze, so you can kind of still see all the places where I would have to otherwise manually add a highlight. I don't have to do that. So this is a worthwhile step. If you handle your models a lot, it might be a good idea to refresh the base coat, particularly if this base coat is a glaze. Now I'm thinking that, so I use a lot of glazes in my painting. This is kind of the more recent development for me, the past couple of projects, and I mean I still kind of deviate every once in a while. I'll go with like a full color base coat, but I find that using the glaze has better results for me. But what I was thinking, it wasn't that. What I was thinking is that the way I use glazes, it's almost like I'm using the contrast paints from Games Workshop. My understanding is that contrast paints, I don't know why that's hard to say right now, is essentially kind of a thinned down version of the Citadel colors range. Although it's not exactly that, because the colors, they hit a little differently, at least for me. They all kind of look a little more cartoony. I don't know if it's higher saturation. I don't know what it is. But I kind of don't like the way the contrast paints look. But the way I paint, it's like I'm making my own contrast paints using regular paints. Just without the goofy tints. So, yeah, it's easy mode. But for my skill level, and my objective, which is to get tabletop ready models, it works. It's a good approach, I think. And it's not for everyone. But if you struggle, like I do, if painting these models is not your skill set, it's not your forte, and yeah, you want to develop your skill. If you're going to do this as a hobby, you probably want to get better at it. But sometimes you just want to get a bunch of models tabletop ready, or maybe you want to save your intense painting time for the hero characters or the elites or something like that. That's a completely valid approach. So if using glazes to paint your models works for you, if it results in models that you can appreciate, that you enjoy, without absolutely hating how much time you've spent on them, or the overall results, if you're not very good, then yeah, there's no shame in it. Glaze away, my friends. It certainly works out better for me than trying, try-harding all of my models and routinely failing. Well, these guys finished drying, think it's time to start on my shoulder pads. These are the things, more than the black armor paint, these are the guys that are going to basically identify my Space Marines as special dudes. They are going to be Deathwatch. And so, because I'm doing a bit of batch painting, I thought it might be a good idea to just prime them all in black. And I'm using black here, where I didn't use black on the models, because I want these to be very shiny, sort of. Basically, I'm going to dry brush silver over these, and the darker the black underneath the dry brush, the prettier the silver comes out. And I'm just going to go ahead and dry brush them right on this painting rack that I used. I've had mixed results with my dry brushing. I don't know what the deal is. I think my brush is still too wet normally. But I don't know. Let's give this a go. So yeah, I think I'm getting too much silver still on the pauldrons here. In fact, here, it might be easier just to take them off the rack. And I'll give you a closer look at what this looks like. So it's pretty dark. So I'm just going to kind of go over it with a little bit of a silver dry brush, and it looks like that. Quite a bit better. I've got a bunch of these to go, but it's important not to forget the back sides and the bottom of the pauldron. You may not always see them, but sometimes you do, and you kind of wish that you did it kind of the first time. At least I do. Now, it seems pretty self-evident to me why I would dry brush as opposed to just going over it with a silver paint. But in case it's not self-evident, like maybe you guys have your rookies, you're just starting out, you don't actually know what dry brushing means. It means you take your brush, usually it's a kind of a beat up brush that you don't really want because dry brushing is kind of hard on your bristles. So you take the brush, you dab it in some paint, and then you take it on a paper towel or something, you rub off just most of it till it's almost very little showing up. And then you just lightly rub the surface of what you want to dry brush. The idea is that the silver paint particles are going to land and stick to just the raised pieces, because you're not firmly brushing it, you're just kind of lightly rubbing the top of it. And so any raised parts are going to collect silver paint. Any recesses, like you see here, like this is text written on the pauldron, any recesses are going to not get much, if any, of the silver paint. And so it's a good way of bringing out some detail without actually having to, run, kind of specifically paint those things, which would be painstaking for pauldrons like these. It does give it a different look, and it's a great technique for a bunch of different models, or, well, specifically parts of models. Anything with lots of raised ridges, or lots of deep recesses. And it's a nice complement to a like a wash or a glaze. So if you don't know, really, if you still don't have a good sense for what dry brushing is, I recommend you check out some of the videos that are online. Not mine. I am not a pro painter. I am not a pro at this. But I'm trying. not to be pro. I'm trying to get better. That's my only goal here. I'm not trying to go pro. I just want to get better, and dry brushing is just one of those tools in my kit that helps make better models. Now that I'm done with these, I'm going to wait for my Marines to finish drying, but I've only done half the pauldrons. For the other half of the pauldrons, I'm going to do these guys. I've got some bits left over from the Kill Team, Kill Team kit, the box. These are the chapter-specific pauldrons. I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ooh, so I'm going to pick one at random because I have 11, and this one at random is not going to be used. Ooh, and that is the Taurens. I won't shed any tears. The Taurens have a difficult color palette. It's bronze and red, which is kind of a weird color. It looks good if you can pull it off, but I am not that guy. So I've got some kind of raven here. I've got a fist, so I could do like an Imperial Fist dude. I can do like a Crimson Fist dude. I've got an Ultramarine. I've got, I think I have another one like this. It's a Crimson Griffin or a Blood Griffin or something like that. There's an Iron Hands. Ooh, there is a wolf dude. What is it? Space wolf. That's what it is. This looks like an eagle's head. I don't know what chapter has an eagle icon, but I'll look it up. Ooh, this looks like a Dark Angels icon. I don't have very many Dark Angels in my Deathwatch army. This is a claw, like some kind of iron raven or some kind of raven. And finally, ooh, is this this is a Blood Angels icon. So I'm going to prime these up. I'm going to prime these up in either white or gray. I haven't decided yet, but I'm going to prime them up in a lighter color because a lot of these are going to have a light color pauldron. So I don't want to make my life harder by priming them in black. So I'm going to go probably go with white. Yeah, make sure the colors are bright. I went ahead and added all of the shoulder pads that I have. So all the models now have their Deathwatch shoulder pad, which is great. They're official, and they've all got their unpainted chapter-specific shoulder pad, which is great. Well, all of them except for these three dudes. You'll notice that they have their Deathwatch pauldron, but they don't yet have their unpainted chapter-specific pauldron. And the reason for that is that they don't fit. So if I go in there and try to get it in, it doesn't go on. It's too tight a fit between this arm and the shield. Now, this is something that I should have thought about, but I didn't. But it is, I believe, a risk factor if you're doing any kind of kit bashing. Sometimes the models won't fit the way you want them to fit. So I'm going to have to find a way of getting these shoulder pads on there. And rather than messing with the placement of the shield, which I may yet have to do, but I don't want to break that. I'm going to take it off the model. I'm going to take the arm off the model and see if I can wedge that in there. Oh, the answer to that is sadly no. So I'm going to have to remove the shield from the arm in order to get this shoulder pad on there. And so I don't normally show these kinds of things on the videos because, you know, they're not always interesting, and yeah, you're going to have trouble getting pieces to fit right with kit bashing. But I thought it would be a good inclusion here because, you know, these videos are really oriented towards noobs, you know, building and painting noobs. And so there might be some benefit there. So if all the fancy editing makes it look like this process has been all cotton candy and baby otters, it has not been. There's been some challenges that I've had to solve kind of off screen. So just FYI, if you undertake something like this, just know there's going to be some struggles, but you'll figure it out. It'll be fine. Now that I've fixed all the shoulder pads and all that kind of good stuff, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some detail. I haven't exactly decided what I'm going to do. I'm thinking for the shields, those of these Marines that have them, I want to emulate the style of the shoulder pad. So it's kind of a silvery look. Particularly with the dry brushing here on the side. But I don't know if I want to make this entire thing silver. Let's see what it looks like. I can always paint over it if I don't like it, right? I mean, it looks okay. Maybe if I add additional details, it'll look a little better, but it doesn't look bad. I don't object to it. So I'll continue working on this shield, see if I like it, and then hit the others. Although I probably should do this guy. It's the whole reason I based them early, so I can stop touching them, and here I've been, you know, touching them. Alright, here's the shield. I'm pretty okay. I'm pretty happy with it. I went with the kind of a silvery look. I was really trying to emulate the shoulder pad, and I think, you know, it's kind of like a more detailed version of the shoulder pad, but I just really like the idea of these two kind of resonating with each other. So, since this worked out, it's kind of a silver shield with the black trim and then the big bold red Inquisition eye. And then I even went with a gold skull there because I've seen, like, so on the shoulder pads, I typically paint the gold skull in the eye. It, you know, it doesn't contrast very well, but it does seem to kind of, I don't know, it seems to work. It's subtle, but it's a nice touch. So I've just got a couple more things to do on this guy. Probably the more difficult piece is going to be painting the shoulder pad. Oh, and, you know, and kind of detailing weapons. So I'm going to hit, basically I'm going to replicate all the shields are going to look just like this. And then I'm going to do some detailing. So here the weapon, I think I'm going to do a red haft with metallic accents, since, you know, all my other weapons are basically red except for these power swords. So I'm going to try to keep red in the weapon kind of palette where I can. So yeah, I'm going to get to detailing. I'd say that I'm close to being done, but this detailing I suspect is going to take me a bit. So you'll see some of it, but a lot of it will be off camera because you don't want to see 3 hours of me painting these models. I bet you'll want to see the finished results soon. And by the power of video editing, you will. You will. So as I was detailing, I stumbled upon, well, not stumbled upon, but I realized there was a couple of things that that maybe starting players may not realize or may not notice, or may be tempted to just kind of power through. But that if you pay attention to these things, they'll really, really help. So there's a couple of 3D elements in these models. So for instance, if you look at the shield, kind of the very tippity top of the Inquisition icon on that shield, you'll notice that it's raised, which means that if you don't paint that side of it, you're gonna have kind of the prime showing through. And the same can be true for the bottom and kind of the sides, and you know, kind of the rest of the shield too. These are these little details that you could just blast through them. And what I mean by blast through them is just, you know, basically ignoring them. Because, you know, tabletop standard being what it is, you can be a little sloppy, right? In the interest of time or whatever. These are, after all, they're not even hero characters. They're just dudes. But, I don't know. For me, I feel like if I leave these little tiny unpainted areas, I regret it after I'm done. Like, I just don't like the way that looks. So I'd rather it be a little sloppier than I could have done, rather than just let it, you know, kind of just stay unpainted. I mean, it can always go back and touch up any areas where I went over with the red, but leaving it unpainted always just, I don't know, it leaves a little ew in my soul, and every time I see them, it's all I can see. So if you want to take your models just that extra step, that extra mile, make sure to hit those areas that are kind of those, you know, those raised edges. It makes a tiny difference, but that tiny difference is huge, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I don't think it does. Still, give it a shot if you can. And so this 3D thing, it also occurs on the skull and crossbones on the shield. And so here, what I tend to do is, since it's going to be black, what I've done in the other model anyway, I make sure that I hit all those three-dimensional areas, all the raised areas on the skull and those bones with the undercoat. So I'm undercoating it in black because I want it to be gold when I'm done with it. But I want you to be able to see that gold. So I'm doing the undercoat in black. And I'm making sure that all these tiny little details are included in the prime. Or in the undercoat, sorry. Now, when this dries, I go back over that with the gold paint. And there, I don't always go all the way around with a 3D element, because having some of that black undercoat kind of on the sides, it gives it kind of a sense of depth. So that's one of those things you want to play by ear. So for sure undercoat it, and if you're going to use metallic paint, then feel free to do not a splotchy job with undercoat, but you can leave some areas with just the dark undercoat, and it still looks pretty good. In fact, it might look better than if you had just done it all up in gold. So just some food for thought. The other little detail that I kind of want to be explicit about in this video is the gold skull on the shoulder pad. Now, I've done, I don't know, by this point, several dozen models with the Deathwatch heraldry. So you've probably seen this before. You've probably seen me do it. Or you've probably seen me at the end, like here they are. And maybe you noticed the gold skull. Maybe you didn't. But I don't think I've ever just kind of highlighted the paint process. And it's a little tricky, but because it's a raised detail, but it's a fine raised detail. So there's not a lot of room for error. So I use, especially, oh my gosh, especially these bones. Like, I don't know, can you see the leg bone? Or, I'm sorry, the crossbones? They're super, super thin. And it's really easy as you're painting these to run over what's underneath them. And so I just want to isolate the long bone. And so what I do is I do some overbrushing. I think I've talked about overbrushing before, but in case you haven't seen all of my videos, and if you haven't, why the heck not? If you haven't seen it, overbrushing is kind of like dry brushing, which I've also talked about explicitly. But basically, you load your brush. Instead of drying it off, you just kind of lightly touch the raised area. And if you're gentle enough, you'll only leave paint on the raised area. So it's kind of like dry brushing in that you're being very gentle in the depositing and that you're focusing on the raised areas, but it isn't like dry brushing because you're not actually drying off your brush. So the end result is something like that, where you can see it's gold, but you have to kind of be looking for it, and that's okay. I think that's fine if you have to look for it. So our Space Marine friends are coming along quite a bit better than I thought. I mean, it's taken me a little longer because I've been taking some extended breaks. So most of these videos are over the course of a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks, depending on my level of motivation. And I'm getting ready to paint what I feel is the thing that I always enjoy the most from my Deathwatch troops, and that is these shoulder pads. These are the kind of the raised icon shoulder pads that are specific to each chapter. For the shoulder pads, I'm doing something just a little bit different than my usual. Something that I've thought about, but I've never done, and I think this is a good chance to do it. So you'll notice that, so this is an Iron Hands pauldron. It's supposed to be black, silver trim, and a white hand. And so what I've done here is I've done two things for this guy specifically. Instead of black, I picked something called dark stone. It's like a really dark brown. And I've made a really thin glaze. It's almost a wash. So over this white primer, it reads as kind of black, but also kind of faded and weird, right? But it's got all these pulled effects the way that only really glazing and washing can do. So I'll show you. Now this is not quite done. I need to touch up, but here's our Ultramarine guy. Same kind of thing. He's got a blue color, but it's really thinned out. And I just kind of pulled it. I dropped it in those gaps, and it has a really neat effect because it's still mostly white, but it reads as blue, but like a faded blue. Did the same thing with our Blood Angel guy here. And this one I probably need to darken up a little bit. His red is kind of a little too faded. And you'll notice I haven't done the icon yet. That's going to be black, but I wanted to get the pauldron done first. So that's kind of how it's looking, and I go back with a pretty wet brush, and I just drop it and let gravity help pull this towards the crevices. So it looks like the icon has some contrast, as well as kind of the borders of the pauldron. Now I may have to go back and darken this up just a little bit, but I think that reads as green, but also there's something different about it. I don't know. I kind of like it. If you're working on Deathwatch, or you're working with raised chapter-specific pauldrons, this might be a nice little trick. If nothing else, it makes your shoulder pads look a little different from everybody else's, or even from other squads in your army. I'll be doing it to the rest of these guys, but I'm less sure about their colors. Well, this guy's probably an Imperial Fist, but he could be something else, right? There's a couple of Fist chapters, so I'll play around. And here they are. My brand new 10-man kill team, made with a 5-man kill team and half of a Mark 3 armor set. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. It's actually quite a bit better than my usual build quality. I think part of it is that the combination of the two kits made things a bit more interesting, or maybe it was a variety of weapons, but I feel like I did a much better job this time around than the last time around. I know I'll show some photos of my my very first kill team. It was one of the first troop choices I made. It wasn't very good. I mean, it was, I've seen worse, but not much. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty excited with the way these turned out. I mean, I'm particularly excited with these pauldrons. I mean, they look pretty sweet. And it really does show me that there's stuff to look forward to when if I ever do like a normal Space Marine army. I'm going to have fun with the glazes and stuff. And, I'm a little bit more confident with my posing. I mean, it isn't great, but I like it. I've done a decent job. I'm pretty happy with myself. There's a really good chance that you can do better, and I hope you do. And maybe someday I'll see those. But, yeah, I'm uncharacteristically happy with these results. I do have another big project that I'm planning, similar to this one, but I'm stepping it up a notch. And it should be interesting too. But before I do that, I want to take a little break. Batch painting 10 dudes was a bit of a journey. So I'll probably be doing a smaller build, a smaller kit. But yeah, anyway, thank you for watching. I appreciate your support. I'm at over 1,000 views somehow. It's thanks to you folks. So, keep watching. I'll keep making as long as you're interested.